Hey, welcome back to the Filmcast. Today I will be reading my second story in my MonsterVerse continuation series. This story is my first movie story, but it's also probably my most controversial story because it's about a monster named Zilla, a monster that diehard Godzilla fans like me either like or absolutely hate. With that out of the way, let's get into the next MonsterVerse story, Zilla. 1 year after the events of Gigan's attack across the United States, people's hatred against Titans has actually lessened because of Mothra's protectiveness to the human race. Despite this, Monarch is still under a lot of pressure, with some reports suggesting that the government may replace Monarch with another group named Apex, who is a rival group to Monarch. Apex is a smaller organization who are hellbent on exterminating all the Titans on Earth. Even with all these nuances, Monarch still holds strong and continues their work even with all of this pressure condensing on them. Meanwhile, at a newly formed Monarch outpost titled Outpost 98, located in Kauai, which is in Hawaii, the mysterious egg that was discovered by Monarch's Russian troops in the Siberian outpost has been studied. Studies have shown that whatever is inside the egg is a genetic mutation whose DNA is a mix between that of Godzilla's and an unknown reptile. Tests also show that the egg is close to hatching, and plans are made for what to do with the baby when it hatches. One plan is to exterminate the creature if it is hostile to people around it, but the other plan is to nurse it and raise it if the creature is rather friendly and not a dangerous Titan. Some Monarch personnel that are overlooking the studies of the egg include Audrey Adams, Nick Adams, and Dr. Eileen Chen. Over the past year of working with the higher Monarch personnel, Nick and Audrey have grown close to many of Monarch's higher employees, but Dr. Chen is the one they've grown closest to the most. Audrey and Chen are confident that the baby from the egg will be a friendly creature that will show no threat to humans, but Nick is a little more cautious since the egg was once in the possession of the late Alan Jonah and is concerned about the creature and what its true nature will be. Later that night, while working on research for the egg, Audrey informs Nick that in a few weeks he will begin training to become the pilot of Mechagodzilla, and though she's proud of him, she expresses concern on how dangerous the job could potentially be. Nick responds to her concerns by reassuring her that she doesn't need to worry and everything will be fine. Their conversation is interrupted by an alarm and an intercom telling Nick and Audrey to meet in the containment room, which is where the egg is being held. The two arrive to be greeted by Chen and Stanton and see that the egg has started to glow green, and the activity inside the egg is growing rapidly. Monarch personnel brace for the hatching of the egg, but soon the activity and green glow suddenly dies and stops entirely. They check for any life response in the egg, but find nothing, and after some tests, come to the conclusion that the baby inside has died, much to the dismay of everyone. Nick, Audrey, and the rest leave the room, sad about the loss of the creature, and they go back to work. Later that night, Nick, now finished for the day, goes to his own assigned room to sleep for the night. A few hours later, Nick wakes up to hear sounds coming from one of the nearby rooms and goes to investigate. He follows the noises to the kitchen and finds the freezer ransacked, so he cleans up the mess and tries to find out what caused the mess in the first place. During his search through the kitchen, Nick discovers a puddle of a weird slimy substance on the ground and puts a sample of it in a little tube, but soon hears a different sound. As Nick searches, he soon realizes that some kind of animal is in the room, and as he looks for it, a roar is emitted behind him, and Nick is so frightened that he jumps forward and slams into a wall and blacks out. Nick then wakes up in his bed the next morning and first looks around totally confused, but soon believes he just woke up from a nightmare and starts his next day. During the day, scientists enter the containment room to extract and dispose of the egg, but when they're moving it, they discover that the egg is lighter than what it originally was, and soon find that it's hollow. When they lift the egg, they discover a huge hole in the bottom of the egg and in the ground. The baby did not die inside the egg, it hatched out of the egg from the bottom. The scientists report this, but the situation is kept quiet to not frighten all the other employees, and some guards investigate the outpost in search of the baby. That night, Nick enters his room with papers describing what training to be Mechagodzilla's pilot will be like, but as he sits down and takes off his jacket, something falls out of a pocket. A tube of a weird slime. Nick is shocked by this, realizing that the supposed dream he had was not a dream. When Nick realizes this, he hears a sound from the closet in his room. He slowly approaches the closet door and opens it. Nick jumps back in fear as the sleeping creature stands up and slowly approaches him. Nick is at first horrified, but soon calms down when the baby creature doesn't harm him and instead behaves very kindly to him. Nick decides to take care of the creature and starts feeding it fish and keeps it in his room. The next day, however, Nick decides to move the creature somewhere else because when he returned with food for the creature, he found it had grown much larger. In the dead of night, Nick manages to sneak the creature without being seen and moves it into a large, empty storage room. Over the next few days, Nick brings food for the creature and starts taking notes on it. Nick first gives the creature a name, Zilla, and then starts observing his behavior and how much he grows. Nick will later explain that he came up with the name Zilla when he gets asked later. He will say, well, he's kind of like Godzilla, but he's not as cool and not worthy to be a god or king of the monsters. Soon, some of the employees start getting suspicious of Nick after citing his odd behavior. Audrey notices quickly and asks him if something is wrong, but he tells her that everything's fine. The reason Nick doesn't say anything about Zilla is because Nick has become attached to him after learning of his gentle nature. Nick is also fearful that if Zilla is discovered and the wrong person finds out about him, that some people will try to hurt him. One night, Sam, Chin, and Stanton are working over research of Titans while Audrey is looking over security cameras in the base. While surveilling the base, Audrey sees Nick through one of the cameras. Nick is carrying a large bag and walking very cautiously. This confirms Audrey's suspicions, and she asks Chen to go with her to find out what's going on with Nick, and the two quietly follow him to the storage room. As they follow him, the two are shocked to see Zilla now standing 20 feet tall and Nick unfolding the bag, which is full of fish for Zilla to eat. While eating, Zilla notices Audrey and Chen, and when Nick turns around, he is surprised to see the two. Audrey calls for Nick to get away from Zilla, but he tells the two they shouldn't be afraid. Audrey demands Nick to explain what's going on and why there's a monster in the base. Nick explains how he found Zilla and has been raising him, and tells her this is why he has been behaving strange. Nick also explains to the two why he didn't tell anyone about Zilla, and Audrey calms down and becomes more understanding. Chen comes forward and suggests to Nick that he should come out and reveal Zilla to the rest of the outpost because then Zilla can get better nourishment and care, which he agrees to do. Now the entire outpost has become aware of Zilla and an entire team is set up to care for him. Soon, the team realizes that Zilla acts the most friendly when Nick is around. Since Zilla was a genetically mutated creature, he doesn't have any parents to take care of him. After being cared for by Nick, Zilla sees him as his guardian and looks up to him more than anyone else. Over the next few weeks, Nick visits Zilla on a regular basis and keeps taking notes on him as he grows. Zilla has the body shape of a T-Rex, but has usable arms that he can use to move on 4 limbs rather than 2. He also has a long, narrow face and has 3 rows of spines shaped like a dolphin's fin on his back, with the tip of the spines facing forward. Nick notes that as Zilla grows, spines start forming out of his back, and those spines start to glow green, suggesting that Zilla has a beam attack like Godzilla does. Taking care of Zilla isn't all fun and games, however. Some personnel, in particular Mark Russell, show concern about Zilla causing trouble as he gets bigger. There's also the fact that sometimes Zilla has a habit of messing with personnel by picking them up and tossing them around, and also knocking into equipment and breaking it. Yet despite these setbacks, Monarch continues raising Zilla with the plan of releasing him once he's big enough. Things take a turn a few weeks later when an alarm goes off and many personnel, including Nick and Audrey, are ordered to get to the containment room. When they arrive, a scientist informs everyone that Zilla is not well, much to the worry of Nick. And everyone sees this when they look into the room and see Zilla breathing heavily. Nick asks what's wrong with him, but a scientist explains that they are not sure and are trying to find out. Soon, Zilla's spines start to glow green, and the light slowly goes up his back, and now everyone knows what's going on and what will happen. All the scientists are ordered to exit the containment room, and everyone else braces for what will happen. Nick looks at Zilla again. All of his spines are glowing green, and Zilla closes his eyes. And when he opens them, they are glowing green too. Zilla lets out one last breath, and then unleashes an atomic breath attack into the air, which is green in color. The beam tears right through the base's ceiling, and after Zilla finishes firing this attack, he lets out a roar, and then returns to his calm and gentle state before the incident. Monarch personnel meet up in another room and decide to release Zilla after the incident. Even though Nick is a little reluctant to this, he eventually agrees to this after being convinced by Audrey and Chen that it's the best for Zilla. The day Monarch tries to release Zilla, Zilla refuses to leave and tries to stay with Nick. But Nick eventually starts yelling at Zilla to leave, which he does. Zilla enters the ocean, sad to be leaving Nick, and before leaving the island, looks back at Nick one more time and swims off into the ocean. After this, a team is formed to watch Zilla's movement with Nick and Audrey as some of the leaders of the group. Personnel overlooking the works of this group include Mark Russell, his daughter Madison, and Eileen Chen. Mark still shows distrust towards Zilla, believing him to be a dangerous creature, even with Chen trying to convince him otherwise. Madison also expresses her suspicion towards Zilla, but also says she doesn't believe Zilla to be a totally evil creature. As the three talk, their conversation is interrupted when they receive word that Zilla has dived deep in the ocean and has disappeared off radar. Mark orders the team to try to find Zilla, which they do, but after looking for days, they report they can't find him. Monarch decides to simply wait for Zilla to reappear and continue watching and studying him then. Off the coast of New York City, 1 month later, a man walks out on a dock with the intention to go fishing. The man casts out his line and waits for a fish, but as he waits, he notices large movement in the water which starts to move towards him. The man gets frightened by the large movement in the water and flees as the dot gets destroyed by the creature. The creature rises and reveals to be Zilla, who has grown to nearly 75 feet tall and starts calmly walking through the edges of the city. Back at Monarch, Mark finds out about Zilla's reemergence in New York and contacts the team led by Nick and Audrey. Nick and Audrey, who were conducting another search for Zilla, order their team to take them to New York City. Nick wants to get to Zilla fast because he intends to try to let the people of the city know that Zilla isn't a dangerous creature and wants the idea to become apparent before law enforcement or even military personnel arrive to try to exterminate Zilla. Nick, Audrey, and the rest of the team makes it to New York City and searches for Zilla and find him feeding on piles of fish near a fishing port. Nick approaches Zilla and calls to him, and seeing Nick, Zilla happily approaches him and rubs his nose against him, much to Nick's delight and amusement. As Zilla and Nick have a nice reunion, law enforcement personnel arrive and demand Nick, Audrey, and the rest of the team to step away from Zilla. Nick and Audrey manage to calm them down by showing Zilla listening to Nick's commands and also by pointing out that Zilla hasn't caused any collateral damage or any human deaths. The law enforcement personnel lower their guns as citizens who were previously hiding come out and cautiously approach Zilla. Nick calls out to the citizens and assures them that Zilla won't hurt anyone and that he is a gentle creature, and the citizens listen to him and no longer fear Zilla. As Zilla looks on into the crowd and eventually at Nick, out of nowhere, a missile flies in and strikes Zilla on his side. Everyone is stunned by this. Nick and Audrey look at where the missile came from and see a battalion of soldiers, tanks, and missile launchers approaching Zilla. Nick and Audrey look at the symbols of the soldiers and realize they are soldiers from Apex. The government called for Apex after being alerted of Zilla rising in New York City and ordered Apex to exterminate him before he could wreak havoc on the city. Monarch kept Zilla a secret from the government so they are not aware of Zilla's kind nature. Nick and Audrey tell the crowds to get to safety as Apex troops get closer, and Zilla squares up to fight the Apex battalion. Zilla's about to combat Apex, but just before he does, the missile launchers fire at him. This doesn't hurt him a lot, but he realizes that Nick and Audrey are vulnerable to the explosions. Zilla decides to protect Nick and Audrey instead of fighting the Apex force, as he doesn't want to lose the two who have raised him the most since he was born. Zilla picks up Nick and Audrey and starts running through the streets as Apex forces give chase. Zilla first manages to outrun Apex and causes little to no damage to the city in the process. But things change when he runs into a vehicle blockade, which causes him to fall, and he also falls into a dead end, leaving him pinned. Zilla sets Nick and Audrey down, and with nowhere to go, Zilla stands up and prepares to fight back against Apex. He also stands in front of Nick and Audrey to protect them from any destruction. An Apex helicopter flies in and fires a series of missiles at Zilla. Most of them hit with little effect, but some hit the buildings behind him and cause loads of debris to fall. Some of the debris falls towards Nick and Audrey, and as the debris gets closer, Zilla hears the debris crash and the screams of Nick and Audrey. Zilla turns around and starts panicking when he can't find the two and starts searching for them in the debris. As Zilla searches for Nick and Audrey, he finds a phone that he recognizes to be Nick's phone. After seeing this, Zilla, believing he just lost the two most important things in his life, begins to cry, letting out roars of sadness and even shedding a tear. By now, Apex forces have surrounded Zilla and prepare to start firing at him. Zilla, hearing the Apex forces, gets angry because of what they did to Nick and Audrey, turns around and squares up, ready to fight them for sure this time. Zilla lets out a roar of fury while Apex personnel begin firing at him. Zilla looks on at them while his tail starts to glow green. Zilla charges up with so much power his eyes glow green again, and he fires his atomic breath at the Apex personnel. The atomic breath attack completely vaporizes the Apex soldiers, tanks, and helicopters. After destroying this force, Zilla lets out another roar and starts running through the city with the intention of destroying all Apex personnel in the area. Zilla runs through the streets firing his atomic breath at Apex vehicles and stepping on their soldiers, showing none of them mercy. The government is alerted of the attacks and decides to prepare soldiers from the US military to assist Apex, but they notice Zilla behaving odd. They notice that Zilla is only attacking Apex personnel and is not causing collateral damage, such as destroying buildings. Back in the city, as Zilla runs through the streets, he comes across a crowd of civilians trying to get to safety who get scared of him, fearing they will end up dead, but Zilla calms down after seeing them. When Zilla sees Apex rocket launchers firing at him, he uses his body to take all the missiles and prevent them from hitting the civilians, giving them time to get to safety. Meanwhile, Nick and Audrey, who survived the falling debris by quickly entering a building nearby before the falling debris could land on them, exit and find the carnage left by Zilla's rampage. Nick and Audrey decide to look for Zilla and calm him down before his rampage causes civilians to die. Zilla then continues to demolish all Apex personnel and starts to follow them to where their headquarters were set up. Zilla follows the remaining Apex forces to Central Park, where he spots a huge blockade covering his entrance into the park. Zilla charges towards the blockade, but instead of slamming into it, he jumps and burrows into the ground. Apex personnel are shocked by this as they were never aware he could do this, but then the ground starts shaking. As the ground shakes aggressively, Zilla jumps out of the ground and vaporizes the rest of the Apex Force with his atomic breath attack. After the attack, all that remains of the Apex Force is their headquarters, which Zilla rips off the top of and sets his eyes on the last Apex member, who was the leader of the Apex attack. The commander grabs a pistol and fires at Zilla, and in response, Zilla picks him up, roars at him, throws him up in the air, and eats him. After completely massacring the Apex Force, Zilla lets out a victory roar. Nick and Audrey make their way through the streets in search of Zilla, but as they get close to him, they hear a loud thumping sound and notice a large shadow behind them. The two turn around to see what the shadow is and look up in shock and awe as they see who has arrived. Zilla hears a footstep and roar and turns around to see what the roar came from. And it's Godzilla. The two titans roar at each other and square up for a fight, which worries Nick, who knows Godzilla will win, but also makes him fear that Godzilla will kill Zilla. Zilla charges at Godzilla and jumps at him. Godzilla then tailwhacks Zilla into the lake in Central Park and blasts him with his atomic breath. Nick is horrified by this, thinking Godzilla just killed Zilla, but then a green light emits and a green beam hits Godzilla in the face, knocking him back. Zilla runs at Godzilla, jumps on him, and bites him in the neck, which causes Godzilla to let out a scream of pain, and he throws Zilla off of him. The two monsters engage in close quarters combat. Zilla puts up the best fight he can, but Godzilla overpowers him. Zilla gets back to his feet, still determined to fight, but before Godzilla can finish him off, a bright light appears in the sky. Nick and Audrey see the light, and after looking at it closely, Nick mutters, "Mothra." Mothra flies towards Zilla with her God Rays power. Zilla tries to shoot her down with his atomic breath, but Mothra dodges them, and the rays are so bright Zilla can't even see her. Mothra flies in and hits Zilla to the ground, and when he tries to get up, Godzilla holds him down with his foot. Mothra flies in front of Zilla's face and shines right into his eyes, which causes Zilla to calm down. Eventually, Zilla becomes calm and neutral again, and Godzilla allows him to get up. Zilla looks around and back up at Godzilla, and bows to him, recognizing him as the king of the monsters. The government sees this and decides to not send US troops into the city, now seeing Zilla's gentle personality. By now, the crowds of citizens who were previously hiding come out and walk towards the three titans, with Nick and Audrey leading the crowds. Zilla notices the crowds and is shocked but relieved to see Nick and Audrey still alive. Zilla moves to the two and rubs his nose against Nick, and Nick hugs him in return. Zilla, seeing the damage that was caused by his presence, decides to leave the city and return to the ocean. Nick, Audrey, and the crowd follow Zilla to the coast, with Godzilla and Mothra also following. Before Zilla leaves, he gives one last look at Nick and Audrey, heads into the ocean, and swims away. Audrey hugs Nick as they watch Zilla swim off, and she tells him, "Don't worry, he'll be okay." The film ends. In a mid-credit scene, the scene shows Zilla swimming and making landfall on an island and letting out a roar. Zilla has decided that this island is his new home. The camera pulls into the sky to show what island Zilla has landed on. Zilla's new home is Skull Island. In a post-credit scene, the scene cuts to a jail cell. The inmates inside are the eco-terrorists who fled the Siberian outpost. They are let out and escorted by two guards, and it turns out the base they are in is an Apex base. Apex found them after they landed their Ospreys nearby and took them prisoner. The eco-terrorists are brought to a lab and are shown work that was confiscated from their Ospreys. This work consists of DNA and genetic mutations. A man walks up to them and says, "Tell us what you know about these." The scene ends. And now I will just say some notes I took. The design of Zilla should resemble his design from the 1998 cartoon and the comic book. Zilla's attitude should be like what it was in the cartoon, which includes being kind to humans and not attacking just out of instinct. Zilla should be less than 300 feet tall when fully grown, and Zilla's green atomic breath should be less powerful than Godzilla's blue atomic breath. So that was Zilla, and it's probably my favorite out of all of my MonsterVerse stories. I enjoyed it, and I hope you did too. Tune in next time when I read my next story, Rise of Biollante. Until then, peace out.